The camera flashes, and for a brief moment, London holds its breath. A young man with a lens around his neck captures the heartbeat of a city, its rebellion, its rhythm, its youth. That man is David Hemmings, the restless face of the 1,960 seconds. Immortalized in Michelangelo Antonioni's blow-up, his stare defined a decade, sharp, detached, searching for meaning in a world moving too fast to care. But behind those blue eyes and that camera's click was another story, one the photographs never showed. The boy soprano turned film star who once sang purity into cathedrals now whispered secrets into studio walls. The icon of swinging London who vanished just as suddenly as he appeared. What really happened to the man who embodied freedom itself, yet could not escape his own reflection? These are the frames the world forgot, and the shadows that fame refused to expose. David Hemmings was never meant to become a symbol. Born in Guildford, England, in 1941, he began as a choir boy, a delicate soprano voice chosen by the celebrated composer Benjamin Britten. Yet destiny had other plans. In 1966, at just 25, he became the pulse of a generation with his role in Blow Up, the film that turned London's fashion scene into cinema and illusion into art. In Antonioni's lens, Hemmings wasn't simply acting, he was the era. Lean suits, Vespa engines, late-night clubs filled with smoke and youth. His character, the cool photographer wandering through London's fog, searching for truth in blurred images, mirrored the soul of a decade caught between freedom and emptiness. Overnight, he was everywhere on magazine covers, in Paris runways, in conversations about what it meant to be modern. But as the 1,970 seconds arrived, the music changed. The lights dimmed. Hollywood moved on to cleaner faces, safer stories. And David Hemmings, the man who once defined the spirit of swinging London, began to fade into silence. Behind that silence lay a story of rebellion, exile, and a quiet search for meaning that few ever heard. Before the flashbulbs and the fashion magazines, David Hemmings was a boy with a voice so pure it echoed through cathedral halls. Born in Guildford in 1941, he grew up in a post-war Britain still draped in gray, where dreams were a luxury. His gift was discovered early, a natural soprano whose tone carried both innocence and ache. Composer Benjamin Britten noticed, casting him in Noyer's Flood and other works that demanded not just talent, but soul. For a time, the boy seemed destined for a life in classical music, not cinema. But adolescence changed everything. The once angelic voice began to deepen, and with it came restlessness, a hunger that could no longer be confined to hymns or choirs. By his late teens, Hemmings had drifted toward the film industry, taking small roles in British productions like St. Joan and The Heart Within. He wasn't a traditional leading man, but there was something magnetic about him, a mix of arrogance and fragility that directors couldn't ignore. Then came 1,966. Antonioni's Blow Up was more than a film. It was an awakening. Set in a world of art, desire, and doubt, it turned Hemmings into an icon overnight. The role of Thomas, the jaded photographer who believes he's captured a murder on film, blurred the line between reality and obsession. When audiences watched him on screen, they weren't just seeing a character, they were watching a mirror held up to their own uncertainty. In that single performance, David Hemmings became the face of modern disillusionment, the man who turned silence and stare into language. He had caught the world's attention and, without realizing it, trapped himself inside its lens. Fame, for David Hemmings, arrived not like sunrise but like a spotlight, blinding, precise, and impossible to escape. After Blow Up, he was hailed as the face of the decade. London's nightlife became his second home, and every room he entered seemed to hum with envy and admiration. But in those crowded rooms, he was already drifting away. Hollywood wanted him, but it wanted a version of him that never existed, the eternal rebel, the fashionable Englishman frozen in 1966. Yet Hemmings refused to play the same role twice. He turned down safe scripts, challenged directors, and carried himself with the quiet defiance of a man allergic to conformity. What had once been seen as charisma was now branded as arrogance. The pressures mounted. Relationships frayed. His marriage to actress Gail Hunnicutt, once the picture of swinging London glamour, began to collapse under the strain of distance and excess. Friends recalled his sharp wit and mercurial moods, the laughter that could turn cold without warning. Behind closed doors, he wrestled with the emptiness that fame could not fill. The boy who had once sung purity into the air now found himself drowning in noise, headlines, gossip, and expectations. Interviews from the period reveal a man torn between cynicism and longing. "I never wanted to be a star," he once said. "I just wanted to do something real." But Hollywood rarely forgives those who stop performing. The calls slowed, the offers faded, and David Hemmings, once the voice and face of rebellion, became a man out of sync with the decade he helped define. The lights were still on him, but they were no longer his. By the mid-1970s, the echo of Blow Up had faded, but its shadow clung to David Hemmings like smoke. He was still young, still gifted, but already carrying the exhaustion of someone who had seen the future and found it empty. The British film industry was changing, and the new wave that once lifted him now drifted toward younger faces and safer stories. Hemmings tried to reinvent himself. He moved behind the camera, directing Running Scared in 1972, a film more introspective than commercial. Critics called it uneven. He called it a conversation with myself. Later came Just a Gigolo, 1978, starring David Bowie, a project filled with promise but tangled in studio interference. Each attempt to rebuild seemed to remind him of what had been lost: creative freedom, trust, and the naive belief that art could save you from yourself. In public, he smiled attending festivals, speaking about cinema's future, yet in private. Friends described a man increasingly withdrawn. The phone that once rang non-stop now stayed silent. He accepted smaller roles, sometimes in projects far beneath his talent, just to stay connected to the craft that once defined him. There was no dramatic fall, no single event to mark the decline, only a slow dimming, like the last reel of film flickering before the screen goes black. The man who once captured London's restless spirit became, in many ways, its ghost, always watching, rarely seen. And yet, somewhere deep within, the artist refused to die. Even as the world forgot his face, he kept creating, directing television, mentoring young filmmakers, and always searching for the frame that could make sense of everything he had lived through. By the turn of the millennium, David Hemmings had become a man of quiet persistence. No longer the star framed in magazine covers, he had settled into character work, subtle, grounded performances that revealed a gentler artistry. Audiences who remembered him as the cool photographer of Blow Up were surprised to find him, decades later, as commanding officers, politicians, and fathers' roles that spoke more to experience than image. He had returned to the craft for its purity, not its spotlight. Between shoots, Hemmings directed episodes of Magnum, P.I., The A-Team, and Airwolf Television that gave him structure and focus. "It's not the fame that matters anymore," he once said quietly to a journalist. "It's the work. It's the doing." In 2003, that same devotion led him to Romania, filming Blessed, a low-budget thriller about redemption. Cast as a priest, he was playing, perhaps unknowingly, a reflection of himself, a man burdened by secrets, seeking forgiveness through creation. Colleagues remembered him as energetic, even joyful, during the shoot. But one evening, after a day's filming, the set fell still. David Hemmings was gone, a mysterious passing that stunned everyone who had known him. There was no scandal, no final scene, just silence. His life ended where it had begun, surrounded by art. Mid-sentence. The crew left his chair untouched the next morning, a small gesture of reverence. It was as if the film itself paused to grieve. And in that quiet, his story found its final frame, not with applause, but with peace. Long after the noise of swinging London faded, David Hemmings' image endured a photograph trapped forever in time. In Blow Up, he was the eye through which the world saw itself. Restless, curious, hungry for meaning. That single performance became more than cinema. It became memory, the visual language of an age that believed freedom could be captured in a frame. But his true legacy lies not only in that role, but in everything that followed. The man who once embodied rebellion became the quiet craftsman who shaped stories from behind the camera. His direction on shows like Magnum, P.I., and The A-Team revealed a discipline few ever associated with him, an artist who traded chaos for control, spectacle for substance. When his posthumous memoir, Blow Up and Other Exaggerations, was released, it revealed a man disarmingly honest about his own flaws, funny, self-critical, and unafraid to confront the ghosts of his youth. It wasn't a confession, but a reconciliation. between the boy who sang for Britain, the rebel who defied Hollywood, and the elder who found solace in creation. Today, when audiences revisit Blow Up, they often pause at that final scene. Hemmings standing in the empty field, camera in hand, surrounded by silence. For a brief moment, he fades from sight. And in that vanishing, he becomes eternal. Fame illuminated David Hemmings with the brightness of 1,000 flashbulbs, but every light casts a shadow. He was the boy who sang purity into music halls, the man who captured the confusion of an entire decade, and the artist who quietly disappeared while still creating. His story is not one of tragedy, but of truth. The truth that art often outlives the artist, yet never frees them from their own reflection. In the contrast between his youth and his ending lies the essence of fame and shadows. The fame, sharp, loud, dazzling. The shadow, quiet, enduring, full of meaning. Hemmings' journey reminds us that even as the world moves on, some faces remain not because they refuse to fade, but because they once looked at life without fear of being seen. When the final reel stopped rolling, David Hemmings left behind more than a legacy of roles. He left a stillness, a reminder that every performance, every frame, carries the echo of the human behind it. Which version of David Hemmings stays with you, the young photographer chasing truth through his lens, or the older artist quietly shaping stories behind the camera? Every era leaves its icons, but few ever understood how fragile their light could be. If his story moved you, share your memory. Tell us which moment, which scene, still lingers in your mind long after the screen fades to black. Because in every spotlight, there's always a shadow waiting to be seen.